What if the passenger you dismissed as unworthy turned out to be the very person holding the future of your airline in her hands on an overnight flight bound for Seattle? Dr. Maya Collins, a brilliant black woman, CEO of a cutting-edge tech firm, stepped into a first-class cabin she had more than earned. But instead of respect, she was met with suspicion, hostility, and open humiliation. A flight attendant questioned her ticket. A fellow passenger sneered at her very presence, and security was called, as though her success could only be a fraud. What they didn't know was that Maya had designed the very system keeping their airline alive, and that night, as servers collapsed and flights across the nation began to fail, she was the only person who could stop the chaos. But here's the real question. When prejudice collides with power, who truly pays the price? And how does one woman turn humiliation into a reckoning that rewrites the rules forever? Stay with us, because this story will take you from the quiet humiliation at a gate to a press conference that shook an entire industry. If you believe stories like this must be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe before we begin. The hum of Miami International Airport clung to the air like static, a blend of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and fragments of conversations colliding in 100 directions. Dr. Maya Collins barely noticed. She had learned long ago to cut through noise, to move with a kind of silent command that cleared her own path. At 36, Maya had built Ariane Labs from nothing more than an idea scribbled on a legal pad and the willpower of someone who had been underestimated one too many times. Now her company was the silent engine behind Helios, the sophisticated mobile platform that powered Oceanic Air's ticketing, baggage, and crew systems. For the airline, Helios was survival. For Maya, it was a crown jewel. Proof that brilliance and persistence could carve through barriers the world tried to erect in front of her. Tonight, though, wasn't just about survival or proof. This red-eye flight to Seattle carried her toward a boardroom that would cement the second phase of Oceanic Air's contract with Ariane Labs, a deal worth 9 figures, a deal that would rewrite her company's future. She walked through the terminal with her usual poise, her navy blazer sharp against the soft cream of her blouse, her steps quick but unhurried. In one hand she carried a slim leather briefcase, in the other a boarding pass glowing from her phone screen. Oceanic Air Flight 762. First class. Seat 2A. The ticket had been booked directly by Oceanic Air's corporate office. When Maya reached the gate, she was met by the polished red carpet leading to the first-class cabin. No lines, no fuss. A soft welcome after 18 months of relentless work. She gave the gate agent her phone and passport. The scanner beeped. Green. The gate agent waved her through, smooth, and then, like entering another world, she stepped onto the plane. The first-class cabin of Flight 762 was bathed in warm amber light, wide leather seats, the quiet murmur of wealthy travelers, the faint clink of ice in crystal tumblers. It was the kind of space designed to signal importance, exclusivity, belonging. Maya exhaled as she slid into her seat. At last, a chance to breathe. She placed her briefcase beneath the seat and looked out the oval window. The Miami night glittered below like scattered diamonds. She thought of her mother, who used to work double shifts as a nurse and still found time to tell her daughter, "Don't let anyone decide your ceiling. Build your own sky." Those words had carried her through MIT, through boardrooms where men twice her age questioned her credentials, through late nights writing code until her eyes blurred. Tonight, she thought, was a victory lap. A flight attendant in a crisp uniform approached. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Collins," Would you like a glass of champagne before takeoff? Maya smiled politely, shaking her head. Just water. Thank you. She wasn't here to celebrate yet, not until the contract was signed. As she adjusted her seatbelt, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan Ross, her lead systems architect. Safe travels. Call if anything urgent. Ethan never wasted words, but she knew the subtext. Everything had to go smoothly. No glitches, no surprises. For a moment, Maya let herself imagine the meeting ahead. The long glass conference table in Seattle. The line of Oceanic Air executives. Thomas Greer at the head, imposing, sharp, known for dismantling proposals with a single raised brow. Tomorrow, she would not just face him. She would own the room. The cabin door closed with a hydraulic hiss. The captain's voice followed, calm and practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Oceanic Air Flight 762 service from Miami to Seattle. Our flight time is approximately 6 hours and 20 minutes. Please make sure your seat belts are securely fastened. The engines roared awake, a vibration that traveled up through the floor into Maya's bones. She leaned back, closing her eyes for just a second. She felt the kind of tired only a woman carrying both ambition and armor could feel. Her thoughts drifted back to the years of proving herself, every raised eyebrow, every dismissive chuckle in a boardroom when she introduced herself as founder and CEO. She had learned to anticipate disbelief, to carry documentation, credentials, contracts, ready to defend her legitimacy in spaces where her presence alone seemed a challenge. But tonight, she told herself, none of that mattered. She belonged here. She had earned every mile, every dollar, every ounce of respect. The plane began to taxi. Maya's chest rose with the swell of adrenaline. She thought again of her mother's voice, build your own sky. She opened her eyes and looked at the cabin around her, the businessmen scrolling on tablets, the couple already reclined with wine in hand, a world of comfort that was supposed to be beyond question. Her seat, her presence, it was not up for debate. And yet, as the nose of the aircraft lifted from the runway and the city lights fell away, Maya couldn't shake the faint, gnawing thought at the back of her mind. She had traveled enough to know that belonging was never guaranteed, that even at 35,000 feet, prejudice had a way of finding its seatbelt, buckling in, and making itself at home. For now, she pressed the thought aside. The cabin tilted gently as the aircraft climbed through the night sky. Maya turned back to the window. The darkness stretched endless and quiet. The stars scattered like data points waiting to be connected. This was supposed to be a smooth flight. She whispered it to herself like a vow. Smooth, uneventful. A clear path to Seattle and the future waiting on the other side. But deep down, in a corner of her mind, she could never quite silence. She wondered what if the turbulence wasn't in the air at all, but sitting just a few rows away, waiting to remind her that not everyone believed she had the right to this seat. The thought lingered like a shadow, just as the plane leveled into its cruising altitude, and the night, full of promise and tension, had only just begun. The seatbelt sign was still glowing when Maya felt the first shift in atmosphere. It was subtle at first, the kind of thing you couldn't quite name, but felt all the same. A presence, a pause, a glance that lasted just one beat too long. Sandra Mills, the lead flight attendant, had begun her rounds through the first-class cabin. Her uniform was immaculate, her blonde hair pinned so tightly that not a strand dared to wander. She smiled at the couple in 2C and 2D, bending low with the polished ease of someone who had rehearsed warmth into muscle memory. When she straightened and turned, her eyes landed on Maya and lingered. It wasn't the glance of curiosity. nor the glance of recognition. It was the glance Maya knew too well. A flicker of disbelief. A question unasked but loudly spoken all the same. "What are you doing here?" Maya met it head on. She didn't blink. She had learned to hold eye contact as if it were armor. But inside, she felt the faint sting that came with recognition. The same sting she had felt in college when a professor assumed she was lost on the first day of class. The same sting in boardrooms where introductions ended with awkward silence before someone asked who she was interning for. Sandra's smile did not quite reach her eyes when she finally spoke. "Can I get you anything else? Ms. Collins champagne wine. Perhaps a menu for dinner. Water is fine," Maya said evenly. "Thank you." Sandra nodded, but the pause between her nod and her departure was long enough to feel like punctuation. Maya turned back to the window, willing herself to shrug it off. "Don't give it power," she told herself. "You're here for something bigger." But as she watched the reflection in the glass, she could see Sandra still standing near the galley, whispering to another attendant. Both of them looked toward Maya, then quickly away. A flicker of laughter, a small shake of the head. Her stomach tightened. She shifted in her seat, trying to reclaim calm. But then another voice broke the quiet, sharp enough to slice through the hum of the cabin. "I don't mean to sound impatient," the woman in 3A announced, though her tone was anything but patient. "But some of us are trying to enjoy our flight. Do we really need to double-check boarding passes up here? Isn't that what the gate is?" For Maya turned slowly, already knowing where the words had come from. Victoria Hale sat poised in her designer athleisure, every thread screaming casual luxury. Her platinum hair was sculpted in perfect waves that hadn't budged since boarding. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled beneath the cabin lights as she adjusted her cashmere throw. She wasn't speaking to Maya directly. Not yet. But her eyes, narrowed just slightly, made clear who she was talking about. Sandra leaned in toward Victoria's seat with a smile of camaraderie, as if to reassure her. "I understand. Ms. Hale, we just have to make sure everything is in order." Victoria gave a little laugh. "Well, I certainly hope so. First class isn't cheap. You expect a certain standard." Maya felt the heat rise up her neck, that familiar mixture of anger and humiliation. It was the way Victoria said standard, as though the word itself had sharp edges, as though Maya's presence was somehow a crack in the polished veneer of this cabin. She thought about ignoring it. She thought about staying silent, keeping her focus on Seattle, on the contract, on the bigger picture. But the silence pressed heavy, too heavy, and the voice inside her whispered what it always whispered: "If you let this slide, you let them win." She unclasped her seatbelt and sat taller. "Everything is in order," she said, her voice calm but carrying. "My ticket was booked by your own corporate office." Sandra blinked, caught off guard by the firmness in Maya's tone. "Of course," she said, too quickly. "It's just procedure." Victoria shifted in her seat, her lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Procedure," she repeated, her voice dripping with irony. "Well, I suppose some passengers need a little extra verification." The words landed like stones. Maya inhaled slowly, counting in her head. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. Her voice stayed steady. "All passengers deserve respect, Miss Hale, verification included." A silence spread through the cabin. A few travelers glanced up from their screens, suddenly alert to the scene unfolding. The couple in 2C exchanged a look, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Sandra's cheeks flushed as she realized the attention they were drawing. She straightened, her tone tightening. Let's not cause a disturbance. I'll just need to recheck your boarding pass. Ms. Collins. Maya held her gaze. You already scanned it once. The system cleared me. Sandra's eyes darted toward Victoria, who arched a brow as if to say, Well, go on. Maya reached for her phone, pulling up the glowing QR code again. She held it out steadily. Here, scan it again if you must. My name is Dr. Maya Collins. Seat 2A, first class. That is where I belong. The words tasted like steel on her tongue. Sandra hesitated, the scanner in her hand trembling just slightly. But before she could press the button, Victoria let out a sharp laugh. My goodness, she said, her voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. She's making such a fuss over a seat. Honestly, if you ask me, some people just can't handle the pressure of being out of place. Out of place. The phrase carved through Maya like a blade. Images flashed in her mind, her mother saving tips from double shifts to buy Maya her first laptop. The long nights coding until dawn. The endless meetings where she had to prove she wasn't someone's assistant, but the one in charge. Every milestone, every sacrifice, condensed into this one moment where a stranger reduced her to out of place. Her chest tightened for a heartbeat. She considered compliance handing over the pass, smiling through clenched teeth, letting the moment pass. The pragmatic part of her mind whispered that she couldn't risk missing the flight. Too much was on the line. But another voice rose, louder, stronger, the voice that had carried her through years of doubt and dismissal. The voice that said if you yield now, you give them permission to define you. She set her jaw. I am not out of place, Maya said clearly, her voice cutting through the hush of the cabin. I am in my seat. I am on my flight. And I will not be diminished because it makes someone else more comfortable. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Victoria's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something sharper anger, maybe even fear of being challenged so openly. Sandra's lips pressed into a thin line, her authority wavering in the face of Maya's calm defiance. The silence stretched until the captain's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign has been turned off. You are free to move about the cabin. The irony was not lost on Maya. Free to move, and yet somehow, still chained by prejudice. She leaned back slowly, her pulse steadying, but her mind refused to rest. This was only the beginning. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones. The glances, the whispers, the accusations they weren't finished. And neither was she. For now, she turned her eyes to the darkness outside. The stars scattered like distant fires. She reminded herself why she was here, why she had to endure. A contract, a future, a system that needed her hands, her code, her mind, and beneath it all, a truth she carried like a shield. No one, not Sandra, not Victoria, not anyone, had the right to tell her where she did or didn't belong. The night pressed on, silent but charged. The battle lines, though invisible, had been drawn, and Maya knew the real turbulence had yet to begin. The cabin had settled into a low hum, the kind of background noise that was meant to soothe travelers into forgetting they were hurtling across the sky in a metal tube. Laptops glowed softly. A few conversations blended into a polite murmur. The couple in 2C clinked wine glasses. On the surface, everything was calm. But Maya could feel the eyes. It wasn't everyone. Most passengers were lost in their own bubbles. But enough glances drifted her way that the air around her felt heavier, like a storm gathering where the sky still looked clear. Sandra's gaze flickered back more often than necessary. each pass laced with suspicion she didn't bother to hide. And Victoria, sitting smugly behind, radiated disdain like perfume. Maya tried to focus on her breathing, inhale, exhale, a rhythm. She reminded herself that tomorrow morning she would sit across from Thomas Greer and his board, negotiating a contract worth hundreds of millions. She reminded herself that she wasn't just any passenger in seat 2A. She was the architect of the very system that kept this airline alive. But the reminders were fragile armor, and Sandra was walking toward her again. "Ms. Collins," the flight attendant said, her voice just a bit louder than necessary. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again. There's been some confusion." Maya blinked, her calm wavering. Confusion. Sandra's expression was clipped, professional on the surface, but laced with condescension. "Yes, just procedure. For security." The word hung there. Security. A loaded term in an airport. On a plane. Maya could feel heads turning. "I already showed it," Maya replied evenly. She held out her phone again, the QR code glowing bright. "You scanned it. Twice." Sandra didn't take the phone. Instead, she shifted her weight, folding her arms as if Maya were resisting some reasonable request. "Ms. Collins, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We've had issues with fraudulent boarding passes. It's important we verify." Her voice was pitched for the audience, not for Maya. It was performative, a public service announcement disguised as authority. Maya felt the flush crawl up her neck. She kept her tone controlled. "Are you suggesting my pass is fraudulent?" Sandra didn't answer directly. "I'm suggesting that some people try to access first class when they don't belong here. It happens." The words cracked like a whip. Gasps from nearby seats. The businessman across the aisle lowered his tablet, eyebrows raised. The couple in 2C exchanged another uneasy glance. Maya's breath caught. Her instinct was to rise, to challenge, to demand accountability. But another instinct, the one honed from years of balancing dignity with survival, whispered caution. If she pushed too hard, Sandra could escalate. A single phrase like "unruly passenger" could end everything. Before she could respond, Victoria's voice sliced through. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Victoria said, leaning forward so her words carried. "We all know what's happening here. Some people think a phone screen is enough to waltz into first class. I pay for Diamond Elite status so I don't have to deal with this." A ripple of discomfort spread through the cabin. No one spoke up. No one challenged her. They just listened, watched, let it unfold. Maya turned to face Victoria fully. Their eyes locked. Maya saw it there, years of entitlement carved into her posture, her tone, her assumptions. To Victoria, this wasn't about a boarding pass. It was about who she thought belonged and who didn't. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Victoria tilted her head, faux innocence dripping from her smile. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Everyone's thinking. The words hit harder than Maya expected. They echoed in the silence, filling the space with a terrible suggestion that Victoria wasn't alone, that maybe others silently agreed. Maya looked at Sandra, who stood frozen, caught between retreat and escalation. The attendant's authority was thin, but her pride was thick, and Maya could see her digging in. "Please step to the galley with me, Ms. Collins," Sandra said finally. "We can resolve this quietly, as though what had just happened wasn't already public, as though humiliation could be contained by moving her out of sight." Maya stayed seated, her voice dropped, deliberate, commanding. "No. You can verify my ticket right here. You can scan it again. My name is Dr. Maya Collins, seat 2A. This is my flight." The firmness of her tone sent another ripple through the cabin. Passengers shifted, sensing the weight of the standoff. Sandra's cheeks flamed. She glanced toward the galley, then back at Maya, then toward Victoria, who crossed her arms in satisfaction. The balance tipped toward escalation. "Ms. Collins," Sandra said, her voice tight, "if you refuse to comply, I will have no choice but to report this as a disturbance." A disturbance. The word was a weapon. In the context of a plane, it carried the power of law enforcement, of headlines, of consequences that reach far beyond this cabin. Maya felt her stomach clench. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about control, about whether she would let herself be paraded down the aisle like a criminal, her dignity stripped in front of strangers. She steadied herself. Her tone was quiet, but each syllable landed like stone. "I am not the disturbance here," Sandra faltered. But before she could reply, Victoria leaned back in her seat, her voice dripping with smug triumph. "Well, I, for one, would like to get some peace and quiet. Can we move this along?" Maya's chest tightened. Every part of her body screamed for release, for anger, for protest, for something louder than the suffocating silence of complicity around her. But she knew that fury, unleashed in this cabin, could cost her everything. Her mind split in two. One side cataloged the stakes, the contract, the system, the lives depending on her work. The other side burned with the weight of history, with every moment she had swallowed indignities to keep moving forward. Her heart pounded. She thought of her mother again, the words whispered like a lifeline. "Build your own sky." She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. When she finally spoke, her voice was like glass, clear and sharp. "You will not erase me, not here, not tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the steady hum of the engine seemed to recede, leaving only the echo of her words suspended in the cabin air. Sandra opened her mouth, then closed it. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Her smirk cracked, and still, no one else spoke. Maya leaned back, reclaiming her seat as if planting a flag. She folded her hands calmly in her lap, though her pulse thundered in her ears. She had not won, not yet, but she had not yielded either. Outside the window, the sky stretched endless and black, stars scattered like witnesses. The plane pressed on through the night, but inside the cabin, the turbulence had already begun. Maya sat stiff in her seat, every nerve still thrumming from the confrontation. The air around her felt different now, charged, brittle. Passengers had gone back to their screens, to their drinks, to pretending nothing had happened. But she could feel the aftershocks in the silence. Every shift of fabric, every cough carried the weight of what had been said. She tried to calm herself, to force her mind back toward Seattle and the meeting that awaited her. She needed her focus. She needed her composure. But the sting of humiliation refused to dissolve, and her thoughts spun in angry circles. That was when her phone buzzed. She glanced down. A call. Ethan Ross. Her chest tightened. Ethan never called mid-flight unless it was an absolute emergency. Messages, yes. Status updates, yes. But a call that was the equivalent of a fire alarm. She answered instantly, her voice low and urgent. "Ethan." "What's wrong?" His reply came fast, rushed, and edged with panic. "Maya. Thank God you picked up. We got a serious problem, a huge one." Maya's stomach dropped. "Talk to me." "It's Helios," Ethan said. "Something's unraveling in the authentication servers. We thought it was stable, but under live traffic, It's collapsing. Boarding passes are glitching. Baggage tracking is throwing false alerts. And the real nightmare is the QR code generator. Tokens are getting corrupted. Maya's blood went cold. Corrupted tokens. The very accusation Sandra had hurled at her not an hour earlier. The irony twisted like a knife. How bad she demanded. It started small. Less than 1% failure rate an hour ago. Now it's over 5% and climbing. It's snowballing. Every corrupted token clogs the database, which increases lag, which generates more corruption. It's a feedback loop. I don't think we've got more than 90 minutes before the whole system crashes. 90 minutes. Maya closed her eyes. Her flight to Seattle was 6 hours long. She gripped the armrest, fighting the surge of adrenaline. "The patch," she said. "The redundancy protocol we designed for Phase 2. That fixes it." "Yes," Ethan said quickly. "But you know the problem. It requires a kernel-level override from the Seattle hub. Physical access. Only you have clearance. We can't deploy it remotely without tripping the airline's security locks." Her mind raced. 90 minutes. A live cascade. Flights already delayed. Customers stranded. Oceanic Air's fragile recovery teetering on collapse. "What symptoms are passengers seeing?" she asked. "Glitches on bookings. Hang-ups at payment. Bags flagged as lost when they aren't. But the real panic's at the gates. Boarding passes are failing. Scanners can't read them. Crews are holding flights. We've already had 3 grounded in New York and Boston." Maya opened her eyes, staring at the darkness beyond the window. She could almost picture it. Airport terminals in chaos. Lines of furious travelers. Agents helpless behind frozen screens. The Phoenix Project had nearly broken air off Vista in the other story she remembered from years past. Now Helios threatened to do the same to Oceanic. She rose slightly in her seat, whispering into the phone. "Ethan, isolate the failing servers. Shunt traffic to the secondary nodes, even if it causes delays. Buy me time. Keep the system breathing." "I'll try," Ethan said. "But Maya, where are you? You should already be in Seattle. Why aren't you here?" She swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. "I'm on Flight 762, Miami to Seattle." "But I was detained." What his voice cracked through the line. "By the crew," she said, bitter steel in her tone. "They accused me of having a fraudulent ticket. A flight attendant refused to verify me. They humiliated me in front of the cabin. For a moment." Ethan was silent. Then he exhaled sharply, almost a laugh, but one edged with disbelief. "You're kidding. Please tell me you're kidding." "I wish I were," Maya said. "But listen to me. That doesn't matter now. What matters is that if I don't get to Seattle, this airline collapses." Ethan's voice dropped. "Steady now," the panic tempered by the clarity of crisis. "Then you need to make them understand. You need to get to that hub." Maya nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Keep the servers alive as long as you can. I'll handle the rest." She ended the call and sat frozen, her phone still clutched in her hand. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the engine's hum. She looked around the cabin. Sandra stood near the galley, talking quietly with another attendant, glancing at Maya as though expecting her to be the problem again. Victoria lounged with her blanket pulled up. Smug satisfaction painted across her face. Neither of them knew. Neither of them had the slightest idea that the woman they tried to push out of place was the only one holding their world together. Maya's fury burned hotter. She wanted to stand and shout it, to tell them all that while they questioned her right to sit in this seat, the system under their wings was collapsing, that while they whispered and doubted, she was the one who could save them. But shouting would solve nothing. She needed precision. She needed control. She glanced at her briefcase tucked beneath the seat. Inside was the patch, the colonel-level override, a drive she had prepared for tomorrow's board meeting, now the only lifeline between oceanic air and financial ruin. The irony made her jaw ache. She was the solution, yet she was treated as the problem. Her mind sharpened. She had endured humiliation before. She had survived bias, dismissal, disbelief. But tonight was different. Tonight, the stakes were not just her dignity, but the survival of a corporation, the fate of thousands of passengers, the future of her own company. She whispered to herself, a vow as much as a reminder. They don't know who they're dealing with. Not yet. The plane's cabin lights dimmed as the crew prepared to serve dinner. The hush of activity cloaked the tension, but inside Maya, the storm raged. She had 90 minutes, maybe less, to turn humiliation into leverage, prejudice into power. She straightened in her seat, gripping the phone. Sandra was coming back down the aisle, her expression braced with authority. Maya felt the heat rise in her chest, but this time, she was not the one on trial. This time, the trial belonged to them. And when the reckoning came, she would not whisper. She would roar. Dinner service began in first class, but the air was far from relaxed. Trays clinked, glasses were set down carefully, and the cabin hummed with a forced calm. Yet beneath the surface, the tension was alive. Everyone had seen the confrontation earlier. Everyone had heard Sandra's words and Victoria's barbs. And now, every move Maya made seemed to carry the weight of watching eyes. She kept her face still, her expression composed, but inside her chest felt like a storm surge. She had spent her entire career balancing on this razor's edge, knowing when to push, when to endure, when to let silence speak louder than protest. Tonight, however, silence felt dangerous. Her phone lay in her lap, screen dark now, but the echo of Ethan's words was deafening. 90 minutes, maybe less. The system was unraveling while she sat trapped in this seat, humiliated by people who had no idea that she was their only lifeline. She looked toward her briefcase under the seat in front of her. Inside it, the patch, the solution. She thought of the blinking red lights that must already be spreading across Oceanic Air's operations screens in Seattle. Each error message another flame catching dry wood. She imagined the COO pacing in panic, executives fielding angry calls, passengers stranded in terminals across the country, all because she was here, pinned not by metal restraints, but by prejudice. Her throat tightened. She thought of her mother again, late nights in their small apartment, stethoscope still around her neck from the hospital shift. Maya, she used to say, the world will try to box you in. Sometimes you'll have to bend to survive. But never let them convince you the box is your size. You're bigger. Always bigger. Maya swallowed hard. She wanted to believe that. She had built her life on believing it. But sitting here, under the scrutiny of Sandra and the smirks of Victoria, she felt the old weight pressing down the question that had haunted her since she was a girl. Was it safer to endure, or did enduring simply feed the fire? Her pulse quickened as she felt movement nearby. A man in a navy jacket was walking slowly down the aisle. Not a flight attendant, not a passenger either. His presence was quieter, heavier. His eyes swept the cabin in practiced arcs, pausing just long enough to assess, never long enough to invite conversation. Maya recognized the posture immediately. Air Marshal. Her stomach dropped. Sandra was speaking to him in a hushed but urgent tone near the galley. Her hands gestured toward Maya's seat, her expression still rigid with authority. The air marshal listened without reaction, nodding once, then adjusting his jacket. In seconds, Maya understood what was happening. Sandra was escalating. Her fingers curled into her lap. If the marshal deemed her a disturbance, she could be restrained, even arrested upon landing. The thought sent a chill down her spine, all because she had insisted on the legitimacy of her seat. The man moved toward her now. He stopped just short of her armrest and leaned in slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, I'm Daniel Brooks, Air Marshal assigned to this flight. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Maya lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. His eyes were steady, tired, but not hostile. He looked like a man who had seen too much and trusted too little. "Of course," she said evenly. "Ask." He studied her for a long moment, then glanced at her phone still resting in her lap. "The crew reported a problem with your boarding pass. Can I see it?" Maya unlocked her phone, pulling up the QR code again. She held it out without hesitation. "Here, scan it again if you'd like. My name is Dr. Maya Collins, Seat 2A, First Class. The ticket was purchased by Oceanic Air's corporate office. My passport matches. I've already verified twice." Daniel took the phone and studied it, then looked at her face, then back at the phone. His brow furrowed slightly, but not in suspicion and calculation. He turned, catching Sandra's eye, then spoke quietly but firmly. "Everything matches. The documents are fine." Sandra stiffened. "But there have been reports of fake passes. Deep fakes. We got a memo." "You have access to the manifest?" Maya interjected, her tone sharp but steady. "Check it. Right here. My name is on it." Sandra's lips thinned. "Not from here. That requires main terminal access." "That's not true," Maya replied instantly. "Every gate terminal and crew system is tied to Helios." "I know, because I built it." Her words slipped out before she could stop them, but once spoken, she didn't regret it. Daniel's eyes flickered. "You built it?" Maya straightened. "Yes. I am the CEO of Airline Labs, the company contracted to design and run the Helios platform your airline depends on. And as we speak, that system is collapsing. I need to get to Seattle to deploy a patch before your entire operation goes dark." Her voice had shifted. No longer just a passenger defending herself. Now it carried the clipped intensity of a leader in crisis. Sandra scoffed, her voice rising with incredulity. "You expect me to believe that this passenger just happens to be enough?" Daniel said quietly. But the firmness in his tone silenced her. He turned back to Maya. "If what you're saying is true, then why didn't you tell the crew earlier?" Maya exhaled, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Because they didn't listen. Because from the moment I stepped on board, I was treated like I didn't belong. And now, because of that, we're wasting time we don't have." The word struck the air marshal harder than Maya expected. He studied her face again, the conviction in her voice, the urgency in her eyes. Something shifted in his expression just slightly, but enough. He believed her. He leaned back, lowering his voice. "I'll confirm with the captain." Sandra bristled, but Daniel ignored her. He moved toward the cockpit, leaving a wake of silence in the cabin. Passengers pretended not to stare, but followed every step with their eyes. Maya sat back slowly, her hands trembling beneath the blanket she pulled over her lap. She hated that tremor, hated the way humiliation tried to live in her bones, but beneath it burned a fiercer truth: she was not powerless. Not here. Not now. She thought again of Ethan's voice, the urgency in his words. 90 minutes, maybe less. The system was bleeding out. Every second mattered, and every second she sat in this seat. Doubted, delayed, diminished. The flames spread. Maya closed her eyes briefly, forcing her breath into rhythm again. She had a choice. She could stay quiet, endure, hope Daniel's intervention was enough. Or she could rise, speak louder, risk everything by forcing the truth into the open. Her mind replayed her mother's voice one more time. Build your own sky. Her eyes opened, sharper now, blazing. She knew her choice. When Daniel returned, she would not wait for permission. She would demand it. She would insist on being escorted forward, briefcase in hand, toward the cockpit and beyond. Because her silence had a cost. And tonight, that cost was measured not just in dignity, but in millions of dollars, thousands of passengers, and the survival of her company. She folded her hands tightly together and whispered to herself, steady, certain. They don't know who they're dealing with, but they will. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft glow. Trays cleared away. The illusion of calm restored. But Maya sat rigid, her pulse hammering in her ears as she waited. Every second felt stretched thin, stretched dangerously across the 90-minute window Ethan had warned about. Daniel Brooks reappeared at the front of the cabin. His presence alone shifted the air. He carried no weapon in sight, no badge displayed, but authority clung to him like a second uniform. Sandra followed close behind, her jaw set, her lips thin with defiance. Daniel stopped at Maya's seat. He crouched slightly, lowering his voice to a register that commanded attention without inviting panic. I spoke to the captain. Maya leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. And he's aware of your claim. He's authorized me to ask more questions, but he's cautious. You understand how it looks. Right. A passenger saying she built the system that runs the airline. Not exactly standard. Maya's breath caught, but she forced her tone calm. I don't have time for skepticism. Ethan Ross, my lead architect, is already rerouting traffic to secondary servers. That buys us maybe an hour. After that, flights start grounding nationwide. You can check the operations feed if you don't believe me. Daniel studied her face. He didn't doubt her conviction, he couldn't. But he was a man bound by protocol, by the heavy weight of what it meant to make the wrong call at 35,000 feet. Even if I take this to the captain, he said carefully, what do you expect him to do? Maya's voice dropped to a razor edge. I expect him to understand that the survival of his airline depends on me landing in Seattle as fast as possible. I need access to their primary hub. I'm the only one with clearance to deploy the patch. If I miss that window, the system dies, and with it, Oceanic Air's future. For a moment, the only sound between them was the hum of the engines. Then, slowly, Daniel nodded. I believe you, he said. Sandra's gasp was audible. You can't just take her word for it. She could be lying. Daniel straightened, his eyes cool as he turned to her. Everything I've seen tells me she's not. And right now, we don't have the luxury of ignoring the possibility that she's telling the truth. Sandra bristled, but his tone left no room for argument. She turned sharply, retreating to the galley in a storm of indignation. Maya exhaled slowly, the first flicker of relief breaking through. But Daniel's eyes held steady on her. That said, I need to be absolutely clear. If I back you, I'm staking my career on this. If I'm wrong, the consequences fall on me too. Maya met his gaze without flinching. If you're wrong, the consequences fall on all of us. Every passenger in this cabin, every crew member in this airline, every shareholder watching the stock collapse tomorrow. This isn't just about me. It's about whether your airline survives the night. Daniel studied her a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod. All right, I'll take you to the captain. Maya felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with purpose. This was it, the opening she needed. He gestured for her to rise. As she stood, she could feel eyes following her, whispers threading through the cabin like smoke. Victoria shifted in her seat, glaring up at her with something close to outrage, as if Maya's very movement was an offense. Unbelievable, Victoria muttered loudly enough to be heard. Giving her special treatment now? Some of us earned our place here. Maya stopped, turning her head just slightly, her voice carrying enough to reach but calm enough to sting. And some of us built it. The hush that followed was sharp, almost electric. Victoria's smirk faltered, her cheeks coloring as she looked away. Maya walked forward, Daniel a quiet shadow at her side. Each step toward the cockpit felt heavier, weighted with memory. She remembered the university dean who questioned her scholarship, the investors who insisted on speaking to her co-founder instead of her, the clients who assumed she was support staff, not the visionary behind the code. Each memory whispered the same refrain, "You don't belong." But each step she took tonight answered with a louder truth, "I do." When they reached the heavy cockpit door, Daniel keyed his comm and spoke in clipped tones. A moment later, the door cracked open, and a pair of eyes peered out. The captain's voice followed, gruff but steady. "This is highly irregular," he said. "What's going on?" Daniel gestured to Maya. "Captain, this is Dr. Maya Collins, CEO of Airline Labs. She says she's the lead architect of Helios. She claims the system is failing, and only she can stabilize it." The captain's eyes narrowed as he studied Maya. "That true?" "Yes," Maya said firmly. "And while we debate this, your entire network is collapsing. Check your SATCOM. Call your ops center. Flights are already grounding." The captain hesitated. He was a man trained to weigh risks in seconds, a man who had made choices between life and death from inside this very cockpit. The disbelief on his face wasn't personal, it was procedural. But the clock was ticking, and Maya could see the moment he realized he couldn't afford to ignore her. He glanced at Daniel, who gave a subtle nod. Then he looked back at Maya. "If you're right, then when we land in Seattle, you'll go straight to the hub under escort. But understand this if you're not who you say you are. If this is a stunt, the consequences will be severe." Maya didn't blink. "Captain, if I'm not who I say I am, you won't have an airline left to punish me with." For a moment, silence. Then the captain exhaled sharply. "Fine. I'll alert ops. Get back to your seat, but know that we're watching." The cockpit door closed again. Maya turned back down the aisle. As she walked, passengers tried not to stare, but failed. She caught fragments of whispers, fragments of disbelief. Some looked at her with curiosity, some with doubt, some with something sharper, tinged with resentment. She sat again, pulling her briefcase closer with quiet precision. Her heartbeat steadied, her mind already running scenarios, calculating the window she had left. Ethan's voice echoed in her head, each word a countdown, 90 minutes, maybe less. She closed her eyes, inhaled, and exhaled. The humiliation still burned, but now it fueled her. This was no longer just about survival. This was about power. For years, she had fought to be seen. Tonight, they would have no choice. Thomas Greer's private jet cut through the night sky at 38,000 feet. Inside, the cabin was quiet, hushed with the muted hum of engines and the clink of a crystal glass as he set down his scotch. The numbers glowing on the laptop in front of him had been beautiful only hours ago. Passenger engagement up 400% since the Helios launch. Ancillary revenue beyond projections. Stock value rising steadily after years of stagnation. For the first time in months, Thomas had felt the rare satisfaction of winning. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration flight, a chance to savor the risks that had paid off. By morning, in Seattle, he would sign the second phase deal with Airline Labs, cementing the partnership that had brought oceanic air back from the brink. But the phone on the table beside him shattered that calm. It was his COO, Martin Delgado, and Martin did not call without reason. Thomas answered briskly. "Martin, tell me the good news quickly. I want to be surprised tomorrow." The voice on the other end was tight, frayed with stress. "Thomas, we have a situation. A big one." Thomas straightened. Scotch forgotten. "How big it's Helios?" Martin said, "The whole system is degrading. Boarding passes are failing nationwide. Check-ins are freezing. Baggage tracking is red across the board. The authentication servers are in a cascade failure." For a moment, Thomas thought he had misheard. He had sat through countless briefings with Maya Collins, with Ethan Ross, with Orion's team. He had seen their simulations, their confidence, their relentless precision. "That's impossible," he said flatly. "Helios passed every stress test." Martin's voice cracked slightly. "Not this one. Not the live one. The East Coast load tipped it over. We're losing ground by the minute. New York and Boston already have planes stuck on the tarmac. Seattle's hub is drowning in error reports." Thomas's jaw tightened. He could see it in his mind's eye. Red lights blooming across the operations wall in Seattle, each one a hemorrhage. "Where is Airline Labs?" he demanded. "Where is Maya?" "We've been trying to reach her," Martin replied. "Her lead architect, Ross, is on a call with our tech teams. He says the only fix is a kernel-level patch, physically deployed at the Seattle hub. He says Collins is the only one with clearance to execute it." Thomas's pulse spiked. "Then where the hell is she?" A pause. According to her assistant, she checked in for Flight 762 from Miami. She should already be airborne, but she's not answering calls. No confirmation she's on board. Thomas's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. He glanced out the window at the indifferent stars. The edge of dread curled through him. "Find her," he snapped. "I don't care if you have to wake the station manager in Miami. Get me answers." Minutes later, as the jet streaked westward, Martin came back, his voice lower, slower, carrying something heavy. "Thomas, we found an incident report." "What kind of incident?" Martin hesitated. "Passenger disturbance. Gate T-17, Miami International. Name on the report, Dr. Maya Collins." The word slammed into Thomas's chest. "Explain." The gate agent claimed her boarding pass was suspicious. Refused to let her through priority boarding. Security was called. She was removed from the line for verification. Silence filled the cabin of Thomas's jet. Even the engines seemed to fade beneath the weight of those words. He spoke at last, his voice low, dangerous. "Martin, are you telling me that the one person who could stop this collapse was humiliated and detained by our own staff? That the architect of Helios, the system keeping this airline alive, was treated like a criminal at the gate?" Martin's reply was barely a whisper. "Yes." Thomas closed his eyes. For a man who prided himself on calculations, on weighing risks with surgical precision, This was the nightmare he had never accounted for, not a technical failure, but a human one. His voice, when it came, was ice. "Where is she now?" "She made it on board," Martin said quickly. "Security overrode the agent at the last moment. She's on the flight, but her phone is off. We can't reach her until they land." Thomas exhaled slowly. Fury laced into every breath. "Thank God she's on the plane. But listen to me carefully. Martin, when she lands, she goes straight to the Seattle hub. No delays, no detours. I don't care if you have to roll a car under the runway. Make it happen." "Yes, sir." "And another thing," Thomas continued, his tone sharper now. "Find me everything on that gate agent. Name, file, record. Whoever thought they could question Dr. Collins' legitimacy has just put this company on the edge of ruin. And the passenger who backed her up, I guarantee there was one find her too. When this is over, their names will be finished with Oceanic Air." Martin's silence carried agreement. Thomas leaned back, running a hand over his face. His mind moved with ruthless efficiency. He had built his empire on reading numbers, but tonight he read something far more dangerous: humiliation. Maya Collins had been insulted not just as a passenger, but as a professional, as the very architect of their survival. And Maya Collins was not a woman who forgot. He had seen her in boardrooms, her calm slicing through arrogance like a blade. He had seen her stand unmoved before investors who underestimated her. He knew that behind her quiet composure was a spine of steel. And now, his staff had poured fire on that steel. The consequences would not be small. His phone buzzed again. A young analyst from Seattle. Sarah Lynn, her voice trembling with urgency. "Mr. Greer, the operations wall is going red. Flights are grounding one by one. We can't update manifests anymore. The system is bleeding out. Unless Dr. Collins gets here soon, I know," Thomas said sharply. Then, softer, almost to himself, "God help us if we've lost her trust." He ended the call and poured himself another glass of scotch, though his hand shook as he lifted it. The liquor burned down his throat, but it did nothing to steady the chill in his veins. For the first time in his career, Thomas Greer felt the ground tilt beneath him, not because of numbers or risk or markets, but because of something far older, far uglier prejudice. A single gate agent's doubt, a single passenger's arrogance, and now the entire airline teetered on collapse. He whispered into the silence, a vow meant only for himself. "When this plane lands, I'll make it right, whatever it costs." But deep down, he knew an apology would not be enough. Maya Collins held the future of Oceanic Air in her hands, and after tonight, she would not settle for contrition. She would demand more, much more. The hours stretched long and brittle as Flight 762 cut westward through the night. The cabin around Maya hummed with false calm attendants moving with rehearsed grace. Passengers absorbed in screens or drifting into uneasy sleep. Yet underneath the hush, she could feel the tension tightening like a wire. It wasn't just the crisis she carried in her chest. It was the weight of being watched, scrutinized, doubted. Sandra Mills passed down the aisle, her expression carved into stone. Every time her eyes swept over Maya, there was the faintest trace of disdain, as though she were waiting for Maya to stumble, to justify the treatment she had inflicted earlier. Victoria Hale, a few rows behind, was less subtle. She whispered pointedly to the man beside her, her words sharp enough to slice the air. "It's ridiculous. Special treatment for someone like her. Some of us actually earned our seats." The words stung, but Maya did not turn. She had learned long ago that some battles were best answered not with anger, but with silence sharpened into focus. Still, her hands tightened around the armrests, every nerve alive with the effort it took to remain calm. Her phone vibrated in her lap. She glanced down. A weak signal flickered through the in-flight Wi-Fi. Just enough for a text to squeeze in. It was from Ethan. Server load at 82% and climbing. East Coast already grounding flights. West Coast ops bracing. You have less than an hour. Maya's throat constricted. Less than an hour. She looked out the window. The sky was a dark canvas sprinkled with stars. The land below invisible. Somewhere down there, airports were unraveling screens freezing. Gates backing up. Passengers shouting at bewildered agents. The system she had built with precision and care was eating itself alive, and she was trapped in a seat at 35,000 feet. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Hold it together. Isolate secondary nodes. I'll be in Seattle before the hour is out. She hit send, praying the message would escape into the fragile pipeline of airborne Wi-Fi. A hand touched her shoulder. She flinched, then turned. Daniel Brooks stood beside her, his expression steady but edged with urgency. "Captain wants you to know," he said quietly. "We're making up time. Strong tailwinds. If all goes well, we'll be on the ground in under 4 hours." Maya shook her head. 4 hours is too long. We may not have one. Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Then tell me exactly what happens if you don't make it in time." Maya lowered her voice. The words clipped. "Clinical. Every boarding pass system will lock. Crews will lose the ability to update manifests. Flights will ground nationwide. By morning, oceanic air will have collapsed. Stock wiped out. Reputation in flames." Daniel absorbed her words without flinching. He was used to assessing risk. But this was a scale beyond anything he carried on his firearm or his badge. He studied her face, the unwavering intensity in her eyes. "And you're really the only one who can stop it." "Yes," she said simply. "Because I wrote the clearance keys myself. Because I don't just know the system, I am the system. Without me, it dies." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he nodded once. "Then I'll make sure nothing stops you from getting to that hub when we land." Maya exhaled, gratitude laced with steel. "Thank you." Sandra's voice cut across the aisle, sharp and indignant. "Marshal Brooks, are you seriously entertaining this fantasy? She's a passenger, nothing more. You're letting her manipulate the cockpit with wild claims." Daniel turned to her, his tone calm but cutting. "Miss Mills, I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone is lying. Dr. Collins is not lying. And unless you'd like to explain to the entire industry tomorrow why you dismissed the woman who built your airline's brain, I suggest you stop obstructing her." A flush crept into Sandra's face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, retreating toward the galleon silence. Victoria's laugh broke the hush, brittle and cruel. "Oh, this is rich. Playing the victim, spinning fairy tales about saving the airline, and now the marshal's buying it. What's next? A parade in her honor when we land." Maya turned her head just slightly, her voice quiet but resonant. "No parade. Just survival. Yours included." Victoria's smirk faltered, if only for a heartbeat. The cabin settled again, though the air remained taut. Maya pressed her hand against the armrest, grounding herself. She could feel the storm gathering on multiple fronts inside Oceanic's operations center, inside the cockpit, inside her own chest. Her phone buzzed again, one last signal squeezing through. Ethan's words lit the screen. "Dallas hub down. Chicago unstable. Maya, If you're not here in 45 minutes, it's over. Her breath caught. 45 minutes. She closed her eyes. For a moment, fear pressed heavy against her ribs. Fear of failure, of being too late, of watching her life's work collapse under her. But beneath the fear burned something stronger. Resolve. Her mother's words rose again in memory. Build your own sky. Maya opened her eyes, gaze steady, jaw set. She would not let them break her. She would not let prejudice, arrogance, or time dictate her worth. When that plane touched Seattle soil, she would walk into the hub with her briefcase and her fire, and she would tear Helios back from the brink. And when oceanic air survived, they would never again question who she was. The captain's voice broke through the cabin speakers, calm but edged with urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Seattle. Weather is clear, and we expect to arrive ahead of schedule. Please remain seated as we prepare for landing. The words rippled through the cabin with the false reassurance of routine. Passengers smiled faintly, some adjusting their seatbelts, some stretching from shallow sleep. To them, it was the end of another long flight. To Maya Collins, it was a countdown. Her phone trembled in her hands as another message from Ethan forced its way through the fragile Wi-Fi. Los Angeles hub failing. Phoenix unstable. If patch not live in 30 minutes, chain collapse irreversible. 30 minutes. Maya closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to breathe past the rising panic. She imagined the servers, rows of blinking lights drowning in red, commands colliding, failing, choking the arteries of an entire airline, all because of one fragile mistake at a gate in Miami. She looked down at her briefcase, the black leather polished by years of travel, a simple vessel carrying the key to survival. She rested her hand on it like a lifeline. The weight inside wasn't just hardware and code, it was leverage. It was justice waiting to be delivered. Sandra Mills passed by again, collecting glasses with clipped motions. She stopped at Maya's row, her voice dropping to a tight whisper. Whatever game you think you're playing, it ends when we land. Don't think you can waltz off this plane with your head high. You've caused nothing but disruption. Maya turned her gaze slowly, her voice quiet but steady. What I've caused is the survival of the airline you work for. If I weren't on this plane, Ms. Mills, by morning you'd be out of a job. Sandra's jaw tightened. Her fingers flexed around the tray, but she said nothing more, moving on with a flush of anger staining her cheeks. Victoria Hale, however, couldn't resist. She leaned forward from her seat, her voice pitched for others to hear. Unbelievable. The arrogance. Acting like she's saving the world just because she got lucky with a boarding pass. I hope someone sets the record straight when we land. Maya did not turn this time. Her silence was sharper than any retort. She had learned that power didn't always require words. Sometimes it was enough to let the truth reveal itself in its own time. The seatbelt sign chimed. The plane dipped lower, the lights of Seattle beginning to shimmer through the windows like constellations pulled close to the earth. Maya's chest tightened. She thought of Ethan pacing in the operations center, his hands flying over keyboards, trying to hold back the flood with chewing gum and tape. She thought of Thomas Greer, high above the country in his private jet, finally realizing the cost of his company's failure, not just technical, but human. And she thought of her mother, whispering into her ear when she was 12, her hands guiding Maya's fingers across a keyboard. Every system has cracks, her mother had said, but if you understand them, you can build something stronger, something no one can take from you. Maya's hands curled tighter around the armrests. Tonight, she would prove that, Miles away, in his private jet, Thomas Greer sat stiffly at his desk. His laptop screen was a bloodbath, real-time feeds of Oceanic Air's operations bleeding into chaos. 100 red notifications blinked in merciless rhythm. Martin Delgado's voice buzzed through the line from Seattle. Thomas, we're down to minutes. Dallas, Chicago, and Phoenix are already grounded. International check-ins are failing in London. If Collins doesn't patch soon enough, Thomas snapped. His hand trembled as he rubbed at his temple. He had built his career on numbers, on forecasting chaos before it arrived. But tonight, chaos had blindsided him, and it wasn't born of numbers at all. It had come from prejudice raw, ugly, small-minded prejudice at a gate. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a tone rarely heard from him. Is she confirmed on board? Tell me she's on that flight. Yes, Martin said. Security confirmed she boarded. The air marshal on board filed a report she identified herself, explained the system failure, and the captain verified her identity. She's there. Thomas, she's coming. Relief flared sharp and fleeting. Then dread returned heavier. She was coming. Yes, but at what cost? She had been humiliated, doubted, delayed, and Maya Collins was not a woman who forgot. Thomas stared at the blinking red on his screen, each one a $sign bleeding away, each one a reminder of who held the knife to stop the bleeding. He poured another drink, but his hand shook as he lifted it. I'll meet her myself when she lands, he said at last. No intermediaries, no delays, direct to the hub. Martin hesitated. Sir, after what happened, what if she refuses? Thomas closed his eyes. Then Oceanic Air dies tonight. Back on the plane. Maya's pulse quickened as the wheels thudded down, the shudder of landing roaring through the cabin. A smattering of relieved sighs rose from passengers. For them, the journey was over. For Maya, it had just begun. The plane taxied slowly, the lights of the runway blazing through the windows. Maya clutched her briefcase tighter, her mind already racing through the steps ahead. Straight to the hub. Direct access to the servers. Deploy the patch. Stop the collapse. But beneath the calculation burned something else resolve. She would not let them erase what had happened. She would not let Oceanic Air move forward as though tonight were just a technical glitch. It was not. It was a human failure, born of arrogance and bias. And when the system was saved, she would make sure they understood that. The plane slowed to a crawl, the captain's voice filling the cabin once more. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle. Local time is 11:42 p.m. Please remain seated until we arrive at the gate. Around her, passengers began gathering their belongings, murmuring with relief. Victoria fussed with her designer bag, muttering under her breath. Sandra stood rigid at the galley, her face unreadable. Daniel Brooks lingered nearby, his eyes steady on Maya, ready to move with her the moment the doors opened. Maya sat still, her briefcase balanced on her knees, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Her heart was a drumbeat of fury and determination. Tonight, she would not simply land, she would arrive. The cabin door clicked open, releasing a gust of cool Seattle night air into the stale atmosphere of Flight 762. Passengers stirred, reaching for overhead bins, murmuring with the casual relief of arrival. But for Maya Collins, the air carried something sharper: urgency, inevitability, the sense that every step now mattered. Daniel Brooks rose before the crowd could surge forward. His stance was clear, authoritative. Remain seated. Please, he instructed, voice steady but firm. One passenger is disembarking first. The ripple of surprise moved quickly. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, whispers darted. Victoria Hale let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Of course," she muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. "Special treatment." Sandra Mills stiffened behind her galley cart, her jaw tight, her cheeks still flushed with resentment. She said nothing this time, but her silence was loud enough. Maya rose slowly, her briefcase in hand, her gaze forward. The humiliation of Miami still pulsed in her veins, but now it was alloyed with something unshakable power. Every eye on her back, every whispered doubt, would only make what came next burn brighter. Daniel guided her down the jet bridge, his movements brisk, his hand never far from the radio clipped to his belt. The doors closed behind them, cutting off the hum of the cabin, replacing it with the sterile brightness of the concourse. Waiting at the end of the bridge was a black sedan, engine running, headlights cutting sharp lines across the tarmac. Two uniformed escorts stood beside it, their posture crisp, their expressions drawn tight with the knowledge that time was bleeding away. "Dr. Collins," one asked, almost breathless. "Yes." "Straight to the operations hub. No stops." The briefest nod, and she slid into the back seat. The leather was cool beneath her palms, the hum of the engine steady, but the silence was brittle. Daniel climbed in beside her, his presence like a shield. The car pulled away, weaving across the service roads of the airport, the lights of Seattle glittering faintly in the distance. Maya's phone buzzed weakly again, one last gasp of connection before they left the terminal's network. A message from Ethan burned across the screen. "System at 92%. Flights grounding coast to coast. We may not last 20 minutes. Her chest tightened. 20 minutes. That was all. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the rhythm of the car steady her. The humiliation of the gate, the sneers, the commands to step aside, every one of them now fused into the drive that pulsed through her. She had been underestimated, dismissed, shoved aside her entire life. Tonight, she would turn that weight into fire. The sedan veered onto the freeway, the city's towers looming larger with every passing second. The hub waited in the industrial stretch south of downtown, a fortress of glass and steel that held the beating digital heart of oceanic air. And it was failing, collapsing like a lung starved of oxygen. Inside, the scene was pandemonium. Banks of monitors that normally displayed a serene map of the world's flights now flickered with crimson errors. Analysts hunched over keyboards, barking commands, their faces pale in the glow of failure. Every screen screamed collapse. At the center of it all stood Martin Delgado, his tie loosened, his forehead slick with sweat. His phone was glued to his ear, his voice a rasp of urgency. "No. Reroute to the secondary nodes. I don't care about latency. Just buy us." He stopped mid-sentence, eyes snapping up as the doors burst open. The sedan's escorts hurried in first, then Maya. For a moment, the chaos seemed to hush, like the room itself had inhaled. Eyes turned, whispers rose, and the wave of realization spread. Some recognized her immediately, the face from the press kits, the CEO of Ariane Labs, the architect of Helios. Others knew only the rumor the woman detained at the gate, the passenger who wasn't supposed to belong in first class. Maya strode forward, her briefcase clasped tight, her expression unyielding. She did not look left or right. She went straight to the console at the center of the room. "Clear this station," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command. The engineers glanced at Martin, uncertain. "Do it," Martin barked. Chairs scraped back. Maya set the briefcase on the console, flipping it open with swift precision. The gleam of the hard drive inside caught the fluorescent lights. The patch, the one fix that could stop the bleeding. As she connected it, the room seemed to lean closer, as though every person inside understood that the fate of the airline now balanced on her fingers. Before she could begin, the door opened again. This time it wasn't another escort. It was Thomas Greer. He entered without his usual swagger. His suit was still immaculate. His tie knotted perfectly, but his face carried exhaustion carved deep into its lines. He paused at the threshold, his eyes locking onto Maya's. The room seemed to still entirely, the chaos outside the walls muffled in the silence. "Maya," he said quietly. No title, no formality, just her name. She did not turn from the console. "You're late." "I know." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual resonance. "And I know what happened in Miami. I know what my staff did. It was inexcusable." Maya's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked up slowly, her gaze sharp enough to cut. Inexcusable doesn't even begin to cover it. While your airline crumbled, your employee humiliated the one person who could save it. Do you understand the irony? Thomas, the destruction you faced tonight was set in motion not by code, not by load, but by arrogance. A murmur moved through the room. Engineers shifted in their seats, some lowering their eyes, others staring openly. Thomas stood straighter, his jaw tightening. "You're right," he said, "and I will answer for it, personally. But right now, I'm asking you." "No." Maya's voice cut clean through him. "You don't get to ask. Not anymore. You'll get my help, but not on your terms." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Maya leaned closer to the console, her voice steady. "When this patch goes live, Oceanic Air survives. But when it does, the balance of power shifts. You'll face me in that boardroom tomorrow, and you'll accept every one of my terms. Double the contract, equity, the fund, and a public apology with my name on your lips. Otherwise—" She tapped the hard drive lightly, like a gavel striking wood. "This fix never touches your servers." The room's collective breath caught. Thomas's gaze flickered, 1,000 calculations racing behind his eyes. For a man used to control, this was a new equation, one where he was not the variable, but the dependent. His lips parted, then pressed tight again. Finally, he nodded. "You'll have it. All of it." Maya's eyes didn't soften. "I'll hold you to that. Then, without another word." She slid the drive into place and began to type. Lines of code spilled across the monitors. Green where there had been red. Stability where there had been collapse. The patch was taking root, stitching together the wounds of Helios. And in the silence of that room, as the airline's lifeblood began to flow again, Maya Collins knew one thing with certainty. She wasn't just saving Oceanic Air. She was taking it. The command line glowed across the screens, cascading strings of code spilling in controlled sequence. Each keystroke from Maya Collins echoed louder than the clatter of the keyboards around her. Engineers leaned forward, watching as the ocean of red on their monitors began to fracture. Patches of green breaking through like islands in a storm. The hum of the servers filled the silence, a low vibration that carried the rhythm of survival. Maya's hands moved with precision. Her mind split between the clinical logic of code and the raw fury still simmering in her chest. Every line she deployed was a stitch in a wound Oceanic Air had inflicted upon itself. Every correction was proof that she had been right all along, that she belonged not just at this console, but at the very heart of power. Ethan Ross's voice crackled through a speaker from the backup terminal. "I'm seeing stability on Node 14. Dallas Hub is responding. Chicago coming back online. God, Maya, it's working. She didn't pause. Keep monitoring. The cascade won't stop until every authentication pathway is rebuilt. Yes, ma'am. Around them, exhausted analysts began to breathe again. Shoulders uncurled. Fingers stopped their nervous tapping. A fragile hope stirred in the room, though none dared to voice it. At the edge of the room, Thomas Greer stood motionless. His tailored suit was immaculate, but the lines around his eyes were etched deeper than hours earlier. He watched as the woman his staff had doubted now commanded his entire operation, with nothing but a laptop and unshakable will. When the first map flickered back to life, a restored flight grid glowing with orderly lines and audible gasps swept the floor. "We've got JFK manifest updates coming through," one analyst whispered. "Phoenix is clearing," another shouted. "Boarding pass is validating again in Boston." The words came like rain after drought. Maya sat back slightly, her fingers still poised but her eyes cool. Calculating. "We're not finished. The patch is live, but the system needs full synchronization. Another 40 minutes before I can certify stability?" Thomas stepped forward finally, his voice low. 40 minutes we didn't have until you gave them back." Maya's gaze cut to him. 40 minutes you almost lost forever because of Sandra Mills. She spoke the name deliberately, letting it hang in the air like an indictment. "Because of Victoria Hale. Because your culture gave them permission to believe I didn't belong." A flicker of discomfort passed across Thomas's face. For once, he didn't have a polished answer. She turned back to the screen. "Don't mistake this for charity. Thomas, I didn't save your airline for free. I saved it because my name is on this code, and I don't let my work burn. But you're going to pay, and not just in dollars." The room fell silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to fade. Thomas swallowed hard, his voice measured. "You've already outlined your terms." "Yes," Maya said evenly. "Double the contract, 2% equity, the Future Leaders Fund, and your apology public. In my name, no corporate spin. You'll have it," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand. You'll have to mean it. You'll have to bleed with it. Because this story will not vanish into press releases and spin rooms. It will outlive both of us. And when people look back, they won't remember the code. They'll remember the choice you made when a black woman stood between you and ruin." The words landed heavy. Engineers shifted uncomfortably, aware they were witnessing not just technical recovery, but a reckoning. Ethan's voice came again over the speaker. "Stability up to 70%. Atlanta hub responding. We're climbing fast." Maya exhaled, her shoulders easing just slightly. The hardest part was done. The system was breathing again, but inside her chest, the storm was not quiet. She remembered the sting of Brenda's voice in Miami. "Step aside, ma'am." The smug smirk of Victoria Hale. The dismissive tone that stripped her dignity in front of strangers. She had swallowed that humiliation because the stakes were higher than her pride. But now, with the airline on its knees, she would demand something greater than dignity. She would demand justice. Thomas spoke again, more quietly now, as though aware the room was still listening. "Maya, what happened to you tonight? It wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal of everything this company should stand for, and I allowed it to exist under my watch. You have my word. Mills will be terminated. Hale will never fly Oceanic again." Maya's hand stilled over the keyboard. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto his. "Not enough." His brow furrowed. "Not enough. I don't want just their removal," she said, her voice quiet but cutting. "I want the world to know why. I want you to stand at that podium and admit what happened. That prejudice poisoned your system as surely as any line of bad code. And then I want you to make sure it never happens again." Thomas's throat worked. He had stood before shareholders, before senators, before global investors, but never had words weighed this heavy. "If that's what it takes, then I'll do it." Maya studied him for a long moment. For the first time since Miami, her anger cooled not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. He had bent, and tomorrow he would break, publicly for all to see. The screens pulsed with green now, the red shrinking, like a tide retreating. The hum of the servers grew steadier, the panic in the room easing into awe. The crisis was not over, but its grip had loosened. Ethan's voice came again, this time tinged with relief. "Stability 92%. Full recovery imminent. Maya, you did it." A murmur of cheers rippled across the floor. Some engineers clapped softly. Others simply sagged in their chairs, the weight of hours of panic lifting. But Maya didn't celebrate. She closed the console, lifted her briefcase, and stood. Her voice was calm, almost cold. "No, we did it. And tomorrow, Thomas will tell the world exactly how." Thomas watched her, his chest tight. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar gnawing at him. Not fear of failure, not the loss of money, but the weight of accountability. Maya Collins had saved his airline, but she had also claimed it. The morning sun cut sharp across Seattle, streaking the glass towers with gold. Outside the hotel ballroom, cameras clicked, microphones jostled, and the press pack pressed forward in restless anticipation. Rumors had swirled all night an outage, chaos at airports, a mysterious passenger pulled from a flight. By dawn, the whispers had merged into one truth. Oceanic Air had nearly collapsed, and only one woman had stopped it. Inside the ballroom, rows of chairs filled quickly. Executives in polished suits lined the front rows, their faces pale from sleepless hours. The air buzzed with the electric tension of spectacle. This was not going to be a typical corporate announcement. At the podium, Thomas Greer adjusted the microphone with hands that betrayed the faintest tremor. For a man known for commanding boardrooms with effortless confidence, the weight of this moment bent his shoulders. He glanced once toward the front row, where Dr. Maya Collins sat, poised and composed, her briefcase at her side. She met his eyes with a calm that unsettled him more than fury ever could. He cleared his throat. "Good morning. Before we begin, I must speak plainly. Last night, Oceanic Air suffered a catastrophic system failure. Flights were grounded, passengers stranded, and the very survival of this airline hung in the balance. But the technical failure was not the only crisis we faced. The room stilled. Every camera light blinked red. Greer's voice dipped lower, stripped of corporate polish. 2 nights ago, at Miami International, one of our most valued partners was humiliated at our own gate. She was accused of fraud, forced aside, and nearly prevented from boarding a flight critical to both her work and our company's survival. This did not happen because of procedure. It happened because of prejudice, and I allowed that culture to fester under my leadership." Gas rippled across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lenses zoomed in. Executives shifted uncomfortably. Greer swallowed hard, forcing the next words. "Dr. Maya Collins is the architect of Helios, the system that powers Oceanic Air. She is the reason our planes move, our schedules hold, our passengers fly safely. And yet, she was told she didn't belong in first class. She was treated as though her presence was suspect because she is a black woman. That was inexcusable. That was on me. He turned then, deliberately, toward Maya. "Dr. Collins, on behalf of Oceanic Air, I apologize. But more than that, I apologize as Thomas Greer, the man who failed to see that bias could threaten not only our dignity, but our survival. You saved this airline not only with your brilliance, but with your strength. And today, I promise you this we will change." The room erupted, cameras flashing, murmurs colliding, reporters shouting questions. But Greer raised a hand. "Steady now. Effective immediately." He continued. "Oceanic Air has doubled our contract with Ariane Labs. Dr. Collins will hold a 2% equity stake in this airline. And together, we are establishing the Maya Collins Future Leaders Fund, a $10 million initiative dedicated to supporting Black and minority women in technology and engineering. This is not charity. This is survival. Because without voices like hers, we cannot hope to fly." The applause started slowly, then swelled, filling the ballroom with a sound rawer than ceremony. Some executives clapped reluctantly, but many stood, their hands echoing the rhythm of change. Maya rose slowly. The room's attention swung to her as she approached the podium, her heels clicking a steady rhythm across the stage. She placed her hands lightly on the edges of the lectern, her eyes sweeping the crowd, then the cameras, as though she were looking straight through the lenses into living rooms across the country. She began softly, her voice carrying not through volume, but gravity. "Last night, I was told to step aside. I was told my presence didn't belong in a space I had earned. That moment was not new to me. It is not new to many people who look like me. But last night, the consequences of that bias nearly destroyed an airline, and that should make all of us pause." The room leaned in. Our systems, whether code or culture, are only as strong as the values they're built on. You can write elegant algorithms, but if you allow prejudice to corrode the foundation, it will fail. Last night, we saw what happens when arrogance and bias collide with responsibility. But we also saw what can happen when accountability finally arrives. Her gaze swept across the executives, then back to the cameras. This is bigger than one airline, bigger than one contract. This is about rewriting the rules, about making sure that when the next Maya Collins stands in line, whether it's at a gate, a boardroom, or a classroom, she is not questioned for who she is, but respected for what she brings. The applause was louder this time, thunder rolling through the ballroom. Maya stepped back from the podium, her composure unshaken, her eyes steady. She had not raised her voice, had not needed theatrics. Truth had carried her farther than rage ever could. In the back of the room, Sandra Mills sat stiffly, flanked by HR representatives. The morning had not been kind to her. She had already been stripped of her badge. Her career at Oceanic ended in a single line of policy terminated for misconduct, resulting in catastrophic loss. She stared down at her folded hands, her face pale. Her world collapsed. And in a quiet hotel room across town, Victoria Hale scrolled through her phone, her name trending across every platform. Clips of her sneers and cutting words had leaked, turned viral by other passengers. Her inbox flooded with outrage, her diamond medallion status revoked, her travel privileges gone, her reputation shredded in the storm she had helped create. Justice had arrived, swift and undeniable. But for Maya Collins, the victory was never about revenge. It was about legacy. As she left the ballroom, reporters shouted her name, flashes bursting like fireworks. But Maya kept her pace calm, her briefcase steady at her side. She wasn't just walking out of a press conference. She was walking into a new future she had built herself. Ethan Ross caught up with her just outside the hall, his face drawn with exhaustion but lit with relief. "You did it," he breathed. Maya shook her head gently. "We did it, and this is just the beginning." The morning air was cool against her skin as she stepped outside, the noise of the city rushing back. She paused for a moment, closing her eyes, breathing deep. The humiliation of Miami still lingered like a scar, but it was no longer just pain. It was fuel. She had taken the moment meant to diminish her and turned it into a movement. She had rewritten the rules, and from this day forward, no one would ever tell her to step aside again. "Doctor?" Maya Collins stepped onto that plane as a passenger. She walked out of Seattle as a legend. What began as a cruel act of prejudice became the spark for systemic change, a reminder that dignity cannot be stripped and brilliance cannot be ignored. Sandra Mills lost her career. Victoria Hale lost her privilege. And Thomas Greer, the CEO who thought he held all the power, was forced to stand before the world and apologize not only with words, but with contracts, equity, and a fund that will open doors for women who come after Maya. But the deeper truth lingers. How many others have been told to step aside, to prove themselves twice, to carry the silent weight of bias every single day? And how many systems, corporate, cultural, human, are still vulnerable to collapse because of it? Maya's story is more than justice. It's a call to see, to value, and to change. And it asks us all a haunting question the next time you see someone doubted for who they are. Will you stay silent, or will you stand with them? If this story moved you, let your voice echo. Like this video, share it widely, and subscribe for more stories where justice isn't just spoken, it is lived.